Hi guys, how old are you? I'd love to see the age range of our viewers. Write your age below.
It's strange how something as small as a photo can feel like a punch in the stomach. One of those cheap little digital gut shots that you didn't even see coming, and yet once it lands, you can't breathe right for hours. I was standing in line at a coffee shop that smelled like burnt hazelnut syrup and forgotten tips, just scrolling my phone while waiting on an overpriced latte when I saw it. The photo, it wasn't anything dramatic, no tragedy, no emergency, just a Facebook post with my parents, all smiles, sitting under a string of pastel balloons that spelled out Happy Bark Day Muffin in glittery letters, while my sister Jenna held her Pomeranian like it was a human baby. They were in San Diego. The caption said, "Celebrating our grandpup's 3rd birthday? Love you, Muffin. Family time is the best time." I stared at it for way too long, even after the barista called my name 3 times. I couldn't stop looking at their faces, beaming, relaxed, not a hint of guilt or awareness in sight. They looked like a damn Hallmark ad. And the worst part? It was my birthday, not next week, not yesterday. Today, that very morning, I had woken up alone in my apartment, checked my phone for a text or call from either of them. Nothing. At first, I'd told myself they were just busy. Maybe they'd call later after work. Maybe they were planning a surprise. I even half convinced myself they were mailing something and didn't want to ruin it. But that photo, that stupid, shiny, glitter-covered photo, that was the real surprise. Now here's the thing. This wasn't the first time they forgot. Not even close. When I turned 28, they were in Florida with Jenna for some spa weekend, and I got a voicemail from my mom 2 days later that started with, "Oh shoot, I completely lost track of time." When I turned 30, they were in Las Vegas, celebrating Jenna's divorce party, which apparently now is a thing people throw for attention, when they screw up their lives and still get rewarded for it. Every time, I told myself it didn't matter. I'm the strong one, the low-maintenance daughter, the one who never asks for anything. I'm the one who doesn't make them worry. That's what they always said. "You've always been so independent, honey," like it was a compliment, like they didn't realize that independence was just another word for ignored. So no, this wasn't new. But something about seeing them smiling with that little fur ball after skipping yet another milestone in my life, something about the way they didn't even think to lie about it, it broke something in me. Not with a bang, not with yelling, not even with tears. It just cracked, quietly, like the kind of fracture that spreads when no one's looking. I didn't call them. I didn't send a bitter text or try to ruin their day the way they ruined mine. Instead, I went home, sat on the couch in my pajamas, opened my laptop, logged into the family phone account, which, for the record, I had been paying for since I was 26 because they couldn't figure out online billing. And I canceled it. Not just paused it. I terminated the entire plan. Phones, data, everything. Just like that. No warning, no drama. Just a clean, quiet slice of silence. Now here's where you might pause and ask yourself, was that too much? Was it petty? Maybe, maybe not. But let me ask you this. How many birthdays does someone have to forget before it stops being a mistake and starts being a message? Have you ever been in a situation where someone's silence hurt worse than their words? Where the people who were supposed to care about you the most acted like your existence was optional? I'm curious, because I didn't cry when I canceled that plan. I didn't feel guilty. I felt seen for the first time in years, even if no one else saw it yet. 3 days passed. No calls, obviously. No texts, because they didn't have service. I thought maybe I'd get an email or a pissed-off message from Jenna asking what happened. But it was quiet, eerily quiet. I went to work like normal, answered emails, sat through boring meetings, made small talk with Sharon from HR about how expensive dog food is now, the irony, and for 3 days, nothing. Then on the 4th day, I looked up from my desk and saw her, my mother, standing at the reception desk of my office, holding her purse like it was about to fall apart, eyes red, cheeks blotchy, face like she hadn't slept in a week. She wasn't just sad. She was wrecked. She didn't ask why I did it. She didn't even mention the phones. She just said my name in a voice I hadn't heard since I was maybe 12. The kind of voice people use when they're about to beg for something they know they don't deserve. And I froze, because something about that look told me this wasn't about a birthday anymore. It wasn't about Muffin the dog, or missed calls, or hurt feelings. Something was wrong, and I wasn't sure I was ready to hear it. I stood there trying to keep my expression flat, trying to hold on to that sweet, cold satisfaction I'd felt just a day earlier. But the thing about revenge is, when it finally hits, it doesn't always land the way you thought it would. And I had no idea just how wrong I'd been. There's a strange kind of violence in being the dependable one, the one who never makes a scene, never throws a fit, never needs rescuing or consoling or any real attention, really, the one who always has her shit together enough that no one bothers asking if she's drowning. People think silence is a virtue, but sometimes it's just the last desperate thing a person does before they explode. And for most of my life, I thought that being invisible to my family was just the cost of being the easy daughter. But standing there, watching my mother's face crumple like a paper cup in the fluorescent lighting of my office lobby, I started to realize that being easy wasn't just something they assumed. I had taught them to do it. I had trained them to ignore me by never demanding to be seen. Growing up, I was the kid who cleaned her room without being told, who got straight A's without reminders, who learned how to microwave dinner by age 9 because Jenna always needed something, and Mom was always exhausted, and Dad was either working late or pretending he was. I remember one night, this must have been when I was maybe 10, Jenna had a full-blown meltdown because she lost her hamster. She was screaming so loud the neighbors came to check in. Mom cried, Dad yelled, and I just sat there in the kitchen, eating cold SpaghettiOs out of the can, wondering if anyone would notice I hadn't spoken in hours. They didn't. When I was 12, I won first place in a regional spelling bee, and my teacher mailed a certificate home with a note about how proud she was. My parents didn't mention it, not once. But that same week, Jenna got detention for calling a teacher a skinny witch. And there was a 2-hour conference, a handwritten apology letter, and a family dinner to talk through Jenna's frustrations. That was always the rhythm. Jenna exploded, and the world bent around her to keep her from falling apart. I did everything right, and the silence I got in return became the wallpaper of my life. I don't think my parents were evil. I think they were just tired and emotionally lazy, the kind of people who cling to dysfunction because it's easier than fixing patterns that go back decades. Jenna was loud, chaotic, impossible to ignore. I was quiet, efficient, and easy to leave behind. They loved us both, sure, but love, when distributed through decades of habit and imbalance, can start to feel like a reward system for bad behavior. So by the time I was an adult, I had this internal rule book. Don't ask for anything, don't expect anyone to show up, and never ever make a scene. Birthdays became just another Tuesday. Celebrations felt like things other people had. And eventually, I just stopped telling people when I was hurt, because the only thing worse than being invisible was being pitied. That's why, when my mom showed up at work crying, it wasn't anger I felt first. It was shame, like maybe I had broken a rule, like I had done something wrong by finally letting them feel what I felt every birthday for the last 15 years. She didn't speak at first, just stood there, mouth opening and closing, trying to find words that didn't sound like excuses. I could see it in her eyes, the panic, the guilt, the confusion of someone who suddenly realized they hadn't just forgotten a birthday, but maybe an entire person. She tried to say something, but the receptionist was staring, and I couldn't handle the pity in her eyes, so I walked her outside, where the parking lot buzzed with the late afternoon heat and that strange summer smell of melting asphalt and distant traffic. "Why didn't you just say something?" she asked. Voice soft, broken, like I owed her an explanation for decades of her own neglect. I didn't answer right away because the truth was, what could I have possibly said that would make her understand? That it wasn't about the dog party or the plane ticket or the cake shaped like a fire hydrant. That it was about every missed piano recital, every empty chair at every graduation, every time she told me how proud she was of Jenna for doing something basic like holding down a job for more than a month. You didn't think I'd notice again, I said, finally, not as an accusation, but like I was stating a weather fact. She flinched. She tried to say something about how they were helping Jenna through something hard, and that they didn't want to ruin my day with bad news. But it sounded so hollow, so rehearsed, like she'd been spinning that justification in her head for 3 days straight. I wanted to scream. Instead, I said nothing, just nodded like I understood, like it was fine. But the truth is, I didn't care about the miscarriage. That sounds cold, I know, but it wasn't about the event. It was about the choice to hide it from me, the choice to lie, the choice to prioritize her again and leave me alone on the one day I couldn't pretend it didn't matter. It wasn't about what happened, it was about who mattered. And I was done pretending I didn't notice the difference. She cried harder then, said she hadn't realized how much it would hurt me, that they didn't think I'd care, that I'd never been the sensitive one. And that was the moment it really hit me, not just the pattern, but the permanence of it. My own mother looked me in the face and admitted that when the chips were down, when something big happened, when they had to choose who to include and who to protect, they didn't even consider me. I looked at her and realized I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt empty. I felt like someone who had been erased from her own family in slow, careful strokes. And maybe that's what scared her most. Not my words, not the phone plan, but the way I just stood there, calm, unmoved, watching her fall apart like it wasn't my job to put her back together. Because this time, it wasn't. She followed me to the car even though I didn't ask her to, her heels clacking unevenly on the cracked pavement like a metronome gone slightly out of sync. And for a moment, I thought she might fall apart completely, right there in the parking lot, in front of the faded yellow lines and oil stains that marked where tired people came and went from tired jobs. I unlocked the passenger door without saying a word and got behind the wheel, the silence between us stretching like an old rope fraying at the ends. It wasn't until we were out of the lot, cruising through the back roads where the buildings got smaller and the air got thicker, that she finally spoke, not in the voice of a mother explaining a mistake, but in the halting, reluctant voice of someone who knew that once the words left her mouth, nothing would ever go back to the way it was before. I didn't come because of the phones, she said, her hands twisting a tissue into a sad little knot, her eyes fixed on the dashboard like she couldn't bear to look at me. I came because Jenna told me she was going to tell you everything, and I couldn't let you hear it from her. And there it was. Vagueness wrapped in urgency, the kind of sentence that instantly tightens something in your chest. Because when someone you've known your whole life suddenly sounds like a stranger with a secret, you know you're on the edge of something that can't be undone. I kept driving, didn't say a word, just let the air settle like dust around us. Because I learned that when someone who's lied to you for years finally wants to tell the truth, you don't interrupt. You wait, you watch, and you prepare yourself for whatever version of reality they've decided is safe enough to finally hand over. She lost the baby, Mom said, and the words were so small, so delicate, that for a second I thought I'd imagined them. Jenna, she clarified, as if I didn't already know, as if the phrase dog birthday hadn't already screamed denial. It wasn't supposed to be public. She didn't want anyone to know. She told us not to tell you because she thought you'd... And here she stopped, took a breath so sharp it sounded like a gasp. Because she thought you'd say, "I told you so." The road blurred for a second. Not because of tears. I hadn't cried, not yet, but because my brain couldn't quite keep up with what it was hearing. I had warned Jenna, of course I had. When she got back together with Daniel, that charming train wreck with the anger problem, and the shiny white smile that cracked like glass when he drank too much, I had told her straight up, he's going to ruin you again, and next time you won't walk away with just a bruised wrist and a dented car door. But she hadn't listened. She never did. And now, suddenly, I was being told that my instinct to protect her, to shout at her when no one else had the guts, was the reason they'd all decided to pretend I didn't exist that week. She needed us, my mother whispered. Like that explained everything. She was a mess. She couldn't stop crying. Daniel left 2 days after it happened, and she was all alone. She said if you found out, it would only make her feel worse. She said she couldn't handle your judgment. I gripped the wheel tighter, not because I was angry, though that emotion was simmering there, hot and bitter, but because I was trying to understand the sheer audacity of what she was saying. My sister was in crisis, spiraling, falling apart, and instead of trusting me, the one person who'd dragged her out of hell more than once, they decided I was a threat. Not Daniel, not the man who'd left her to bleed alone in a rental apartment 2,000 miles from home. Me. You think I would have gloated? I asked. Voice low, steady, too quiet to match what I felt inside. You think I wanted to be right about something like that? Her eyes finally met mine, and in them I saw a flicker of something like shame, but it wasn't enough to wash away the damage. It was just enough to prove she understood what she'd done. No, she said after a long pause, I think we didn't know what you'd do, and that was scarier than anything else. And that hit harder than anything else she could have said, because what she was really telling me, between the lines, behind the trembling voice, and the apologies waiting just beneath the surface, was that they had never known me at all. They had never taken the time to ask who I was, what I could handle, how I might help. They had built a version of me that was easier to sideline, cold, unfeeling, judgmental, and when things got hard, they retreated into that fiction like it was a safety net. I pulled into a quiet lot near the river, turned off the engine, and sat there while she stared out the window like she was hoping the landscape would offer a script she could follow. Do you know what hurts the most? I asked, not expecting a real answer. It's not that you chose her. It's that you didn't even give me a chance to show you who I am now. You decided I was dangerous without even talking to me. She didn't reply, just covered her mouth with both hands, like the weight of the truth was pressing her lungs closed. And in that silence, I realized something brutal and permanent. This wasn't about a miscarriage, or a party, or even the years of uneven love. This was about erasure, about how, in their effort to protect Jenna from judgment, they had willingly sacrificed their relationship with the only person in the family who had never asked for anything but honesty. I sat back in my seat, watching the river flow like nothing had happened, and I felt something in me settle. Not peace, not forgiveness, but a kind of finality, like the end of a long, painful math problem where the numbers never added up. And now I finally knew why. She wanted to explain more. I could see it in the way her lips parted, the way she kept glancing at me like a child waiting to be scolded, but I didn't let her, because there was nothing left I needed to hear. And as we sat there in that still, suffocating moment, I knew the next move was mine. But it wouldn't be what she expected. There's a difference between forgetting something because it slipped your mind and burying something so deep that you convince yourself it never existed in the first place. And I think that's exactly what my mother had done with the memory that came flooding back to me the moment she said they were afraid I'd say, I told you so. That one line, so casual, so carelessly delivered in her flurry of half-excuses and strained apologies, cracked something open in me that hadn't seen daylight in years. And suddenly I was no longer sitting in a parked car by the river with my mother beside me wringing her hands. I was standing in a hallway 3 years earlier, holding a half-empty bottle of cheap red wine and listening to the muffled sound of my sister sobbing behind a locked bathroom door, while her boyfriend, that smug bastard Daniel, shouted through it like the whole apartment was his goddamn kingdom. That night was supposed to be nothing more than a quick visit, one of those obligatory sisterly drop-ins where you bring overpriced wine, pretend you like the new throw pillows, and listen to her go on about her latest emotional crisis like it's the first time heartbreak has ever existed on Earth. I'd shown up already tired, already bracing myself for whatever storm she'd created this time, but I hadn't expected to walk in and find Jenna curled up on the couch, mascara smeared across her cheeks, eyes wide and glassy like a deer that's been hit, but hasn't figured out how to fall yet. Daniel wasn't there at first, but he came back midway through our awkward attempt at dinner, storming in with that fake nice voice and an attitude that clung to him like cologne, thick, suffocating, and impossible to ignore. They started arguing before I'd even taken my second bite. Something about rent, about who paid the last utility bill, about whether or not Jenna had been flirting with someone at work. It escalated quickly, the way all their arguments did, like a lit match in a dry forest. And before I knew it, she was locked in the bathroom, crying, and he was pounding on the door while I stood there, useless, clutching that wine bottle like it could do anything besides get me arrested if I used it the way I wanted to. I told him to back off. I told him he was out of line. He laughed, said I was jealous, said I didn't understand their dynamic. And when I finally got Jenna out of the bathroom, when I tried to take her with me, she shook her head, whispered that she couldn't leave him because he's just upset, he didn't mean it. And I saw then, clearer than ever, that she wasn't just scared of him. She was addicted to the chaos, to the high of being needed in a twisted, toxic way. I called my parents that night. I told them everything. I begged them to help get her out of there. And what did they do? They told me to calm down, that Jenna was an adult, that relationships were complicated, that I needed to let her figure it out. And within 2 weeks, they were helping her move into a nicer apartment with Daniel because apparently the problem wasn't the abuse, it was the environment. They said I was being too harsh, too involved, too judgmental, and that I had to trust Jenna to make her own choices. So when my mother told me 3 years later that they'd hidden her miscarriage from me because they were afraid I'd judge, what she really meant was that they were afraid I'd remember. Remember the night Jenna locked herself in the bathroom. Remember the way Daniel spat my name like an insult. Remember that they had chosen convenience over confrontation and dressed it up as love. And maybe that's what made the betrayal feel so complete. Not just that they failed me, but that they failed her too, and still couldn't admit it. I didn't say any of this out loud. I didn't ask if they remembered that night, or if they remembered telling me that Jenna needed support, not interference. I didn't bother pointing out that the support they gave her, money, housing, blind loyalty, had only deepened the hole she kept digging. Because if they couldn't see it then, what was the point of spelling it out now? Instead, I let my mother sit there, still wiping at her face, still acting like she was the victim of some cruel twist of fate, like this whole mess had fallen on her out of nowhere instead of being built, brick by brick, by years of denial and misplaced empathy. And in that moment, I realized something bitter and undeniable. My family didn't just overlook me because I was strong or quiet or capable. They needed to overlook me because acknowledging me meant acknowledging every uncomfortable truth they'd spent years pretending wasn't real. They didn't sideline me because I was wrong. They sidelined me because I was right. And being right meant they were the ones who failed. That night, after she left, after her voice finally cracked for good, and she shuffled back to her car like a woman who'd just buried a part of herself, I sat alone in my kitchen, lights off, holding that memory of the wine bottle in the hallway and my sister's voice behind a door. And I made a decision, not out of rage or spite or even vengeance, but out of the cold, clear understanding that the person I had been in that hallway, the one who showed up even when no one wanted her to, deserved better than this quiet erasure. Because sometimes the real revenge isn't in yelling or cutting people off. Sometimes it's in showing them, slowly and unmistakably, exactly what they lost when they chose not to know you. There's a moment, and it doesn't come often, when clarity arrives not like a lightning bolt, but like the slow rising of tidewater, creeping up your ankles until you realize the ground beneath you has shifted, and you can no longer pretend you're standing in the same place where everything began. After my mother left that afternoon, after all the words had been said and all the silences had said even more, I sat alone in my apartment surrounded by the dull hum of a fridge that needed replacing, the distant bark of a neighbor's dog, and the uncomfortable echo of everything I hadn't told her, not because I couldn't, but because it wouldn't have mattered. It took me a while to understand that some people don't change when you explain. They only become better at pretending they agree with you until they've safely ushered the conversation back into the same cycle that broke you in the first place. I didn't unblock her number. I didn't check the voicemail I knew she would eventually leave. I didn't tell anyone at work what had happened or what it meant. Instead, I did what I had always done when emotions threatened to crush me from the inside out. I got practical, I cleaned, I threw out expired food. I finally called the plumber about the leak in the bathroom sink. I filed receipts I'd been avoiding for months and even took the recycling out. I filled the spaces around me with tasks. Not because I was busy, but because the alternative was thinking about whether or not my silence now made me the same kind of coward I had accused my family of being. The next morning, before work, I sat down with a blank piece of paper. Yes, actual paper, not a laptop or phone. And I started to write. I didn't even realize what I was doing until the first line was already down, already inked in my neat, tense handwriting. You probably don't want to hear from me, but that's never stopped me before. It was a letter to Jenna, not an olive branch, not a peace treaty, but something more complicated, more raw. A release, maybe, or a final attempt to say the thing I had never been allowed to say when we were kids. When I was the second place medal no one remembered to award. I didn't hold back. I wrote about how I used to watch her get praised for merely existing while I bent over backward to earn a nod. I wrote about the night she called me at 2 a.m. crying because Daniel had left her at a gas station, and how I drove 35 miles without shoes just to pick her up, only to be ignored again the next time she went back to him. I reminded her of the time she threw a tantrum at my college graduation because her boyfriend broke up with her during the ceremony, and how Mom and Dad spent the whole dinner comforting her while I paid for my own celebratory meal. I wrote it all, not with venom, not with cruelty, but with the exhaustion of someone who had spent too many years folding herself smaller so someone else could take up more room. At the end, I didn't ask for reconciliation. I didn't ask for change. I told her I was tired, and I didn't have the energy to hate her, but I also didn't have the strength to pretend anymore. I told her I hoped she got better, whatever that meant, but that I wasn't going to be part of the story where I'm always the one picking up the pieces. I sealed the envelope, addressed it to her apartment in California, and dropped it in a mailbox without ceremony, like I was sending away a version of myself I'd outgrown. Weeks passed. The world kept turning, and no dramatic music played in the background. Life, I realized, doesn't come with crescendos when you want them, just the quiet ache of a new normal setting in. Then, one Thursday evening, just as I was about to toss out a pile of junk mail, I noticed a small package wedged awkwardly between a cable bill and a charity flyer. No return address, just my name, scrawled in Jenna's handwriting, which I recognized instantly because it always tilted a little too far to the right, like she was leaning into her own chaos. Inside was a birthday card. Not fancy, not even new. It looked like something she'd found at the bottom of a drawer. The message was generic, wishing you all the happiness in the world. But inside the card was a photo. It was Muffin, her Pomeranian, wearing a ridiculous sparkly party hat, sitting in front of a cake shaped like a bone. Taped behind the photo was a check. $1,000. No note, no explanation, just the dog, the card, and the money. I stared at it for a long time, wondering if it was a joke or a test or maybe both. Was this guilt? Was it peace? Was it Jenna trying, in the only way she knew how, to say she saw me now, a little too late and a little too awkwardly? I didn't cash the check. I didn't text her. I didn't unblock her. I put the envelope in the drawer beneath my sink where I kept old batteries and instruction manuals and the kind of keys that don't open anything anymore. That night, I sat at a coffee shop, the same one where I'd seen the birthday photo weeks earlier, the same one where I'd realized how invisible I'd become, and I stared at my phone. My mother's number was still blocked. Her name grayed out like a ghost in my contacts list, haunting but distant. And for the first time, I felt something that wasn't anger or sadness or regret. I felt choice. I could call. I could unblock her. I could pick up the broken pieces of our family and try to glue them back together with trembling hands and tentative apologies. Or I could leave them exactly where they were, on the floor, scattered, incomplete, and learn how to live with the cracks in my own foundation without trying to fix anyone else's anymore. You can forgive people and still never let them back in. That's the part they never tell you. That sometimes closure doesn't come from reunion or healing or dramatic reconciliations. Sometimes closure is knowing you have the power to open the door again and choosing not to. As I sat there, phone in hand, surrounded by the soft clatter of mugs and the hum of strangers' conversations, I didn't make a decision. I didn't call. I didn't delete. I just held the phone, breathed deep, and let the weight of possibility sit with me like an old friend. Because maybe, just maybe, the real ending isn't in what you say. It's in what you no longer need to say at all.